7, which is on seamless communication. So this is a slightly broad topic, and we're going to address usually what complicates life for marketers and how we can make it better. Session duration is 30 minutes, and feel free to kind of ask questions in between or post them in the chat window as well. And we are recording the session so that will be made available on the Connected CMO website as well. This is a program or a campaign that they see. So unfortunately for us, most of the time, this is what marketing looks like. So we have, on the one hand, we appreciate your business, thank you for flying the friendly skies, and then you actually have the on-ground staff who seem to have got a totally different brief and don't actually seem to live up to whatever was the chosen brand message. So in today's session, we're going to talk about why does this happen, how you can prevent it, and how do we put together a process to have seamless communications. A lot of the discussion is because of my background based on B2B experience, but it works for B2C as well. So generally speaking, marketers spend their day communicating, right? And the important function areas for us are alignment, resourcing, communication, and then of course progress review. But what often happens is that our focus, which we would like to spend on customers and prospects, starts to shift towards internal communication with our colleagues and partners. So, how we really spend our days is that we do a lot of stuff of alignment, resending, recommunicating, re-educating, retargeting, whereas, what we would really like to do is engage with our customers and prospects. So how do we actually make this process more efficient? How do we cover everything first time around so we don't have to spend so much time on material which really doesn't add too much value to the customer or to our businesses. So this, we spoke to a number of CMOs, and this is what it ended up that the day spent like. They were spent on. So as you can see, a lot of it is actually on material that doesn't help them with their actual goal of campaign management or communication. They spend a lot of time on dashboards, upstream reporting, emails, team reviews. So, and I think all of us have been there, so you know that this is required, but you would like to focus on the communication piece and automate or put a process in place so that, our time isn't frittered away doing things that perhaps aren't adding value to our career or to the organization. So the key time eaters for us, and which prevents us from having a truly seamless organization, is that you have multiple data sources that aren't on the same page. So, we started with the cartoon, but that's often the thing. I mean, my training program or my incentives are aligned to some different set of parameters, and your brief said something, but that really wasn't what I was trained to do. So if you take the case of United, clearly there were operational demands that required additional people on a flight that was already overbooked, and they had no choice, really speaking from their perspective, but to get those additional customers off that flight. So, clearly it's a data source that isn't on the same page. The flow of information is again a bit bumpy. Rarely do you find everything the first time you want it. So occasionally it's fly through everything is there and you're really excited, but then you hit a stop and you can't find the rest of it. Divisional silos are often a problem. Each organization has its own divisions and they don't necessarily share the data. Most of us get frustrated because you've put something out there, but that department says, well, that's not really what I was told. Or, just send it to me again and again and again. Most marketing campaigns are multi-channel rather than omni-channel. which means that the channels aren't really integrated, so you actually have to create content and collect data for each channel individually. And then, of course, there is inefficient connectivity between the internal and external partners, which means that often, you may have a sophisticated analytics system in-house, but since your partners do not have access to it, you have to extract all the data and send it to them. Goes out as an Excel sheet, comes back. Again, you have to upload all of the analytics in. It's a very inefficient way really to do business because you're losing data as well as time, and there's a lag between your data every time you do this. So let's start with, the basic communication point, and this is often the root cause of much of communications disparities. What do you actually stand for? Now, when we do this with clients and we run it across multiple people within the organization, what often happens is that the organization does not have a single view of what it stands for. The second case, which is equally bad, is that the organization has a single view, but it isn't the ideal view as far as the customer is concerned. For example, people describe themselves as a subdivision of the firm. So you may say that, oh, I'm from the retail department, so I just talk about the retail bits, or I'm from the fashion side, so I only talk about the fashion side, or I'm from the testing team or from the infra team. And therefore, when you talk to customers, they do not get the big picture. And secondly, your communication starts to get misaligned because perhaps you are focusing on operations, whereas the rest of the organization is talking about how they can enhance revenue for the customer. So the first and most critical step is actually to get this right and be able as an organization to say one single thing of what do you actually stand for, and ideally this should be a differentiated offering. So the template that I really want everybody to use, and in terms of identifying what's your differentiator, is what I would call the branding house, where you just have to fill it up. What is your organization? And the box is necessarily small so that you don't use a lot of words for it. Then answer the question of why someone should buy from this organization. And the most tricky one is the top of the pyramid, where people have to answer the question of why not buy something else. So what is the unique offering that you bring to the table that makes people want to buy from you and not from the competitor organization? And this template works for B2B and B2C, and it's something that ideally marketing would put together and present to the larger team, the management team and the board, so that everybody's on the same page as to why this organization exists. Today, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the cult of why. So the differentiator doesn't necessarily have to be a product. It could also be, why do you do what you do? But whatever it is, it has to be written down, and ideally it should not exceed 10 words when you describe it, so that you can share it in the elevator, on a plane, wherever, with your clients. But more importantly, also to your internal employees, is very clear what it is that the organization stands for. The second table that I have is the brand attributes, and I find this helps companies to gain clarity on the elements which could be a differentiator for them. So it's not that you can't add more attributes, but usually you will find this covers it for many firms, particularly services firms. If you're a product firm, we can talk. There is a slightly different template you can use for this, the ABCD model. But each one of these also has to be filled out for every organization, because if you have a brand guidebook which you can share internally or with agencies, then you will find that much of the friction of I didn't know what you said, or no one actually told me that this was something I had to do, will go away if you're clear about what's a vision, what makes your people different, what's your differentiator. So again, if price is not your differentiator, then it should not be in your communication material ever to your customers or even to your internal people, right? I've segregated the attributes as core and surround. Core, in my definition, is what is internal and like a hard value for the organization. Surround is often contextual. So your investor returns may be, 3%, maybe not so hot, but if the rest of the industry is at 1%, then definitely from context perspective, yours looks very good. If nobody else is doing much about industry development, again, you may look really good. Similarly, environment and so on. They don't necessarily impact the actual product attributes, but they certainly help to build a better brand for your organization. But clearly, we need to write down all of these, otherwise, I've actually used this slide in a different format earlier. This is a company lens of business enablement. So, what does the organization need to make the brand attributes come alive? So, if we want to do awareness, and why do we do it, and what kind of communication tools do we need to make that work? So I've broken down the phases into awareness, lead gen, nurture, convert, and engage. And at each point, I have mentioned the common tools that are used by marketers to make these work. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody would do all of it, or that this is the mutually exclusive, comprehensively exclusive list. But certainly, it's a good starting point, and it is worth checking to see if you actually have all these elements in it. Now, the consumer is really saturated. And so we really have to think through how do we make it interesting for the customer, how, do we map it across what they want. So again, this slide goes with the previous slide. This is the need solution map. And again, it breaks up the customer needs across the phases of initial research, problem definition, shortlisting, final selection, and post-purchase. And at each point, it tries to put down some of the doubts that the person might have, and then what content would help for them to address those doubts, and to see whether the company actually has content aligned with the queries of the customer at this point. And again, this is like a checklist and repository every marketing team needs to have before you proceed to actually start pumping out content into the external world. I have a listing of the channels that are typically used. Again, your emphasis on a particular channel would vary depending on whether you were B2B or B2C, and also, of course, who are the people that you are trying to target. So first, you would define your target audience, and usually this is done on numerous parameters such as ability to buy, or potential customers, so propensity to buy. So it's propensity to buy, then potential to buy, and then of course, based on your budget, you have regional restrictions or geographic restrictions or language restrictions. So you start adding filters, and generally speaking, the less money you have, the more number of filters you will apply, and the more money you have, the broader and more mainstream your audience is likely to be. Each of these channels is more relevant for a particular business or a particular target audience. So the more number of splits you have for your target audiences, the more finally you would have to refine your choice of media for each one of them. And the larger your organization, the more number of these campaigns you might need to run. So something like a thought leadership, if you have multiple verticals, then you're going to have thought leadership for each one of them. And this is even if you are in B2C, same thing applies. So if, let's say, you sell fashion products as well as, say, cosmetics, you would need to have thought leadership on both of those. And in the IT world, if you are, let's say, in IoT as well as infrastructure, you would need to showcase thought leadership in both. And, depending on how broad spread you are, you may need to actually invest in a team that does nothing but create thought leadership for you. Again, customer mining depends what percentage of your business comes from existing or new, and therefore, you would fine tune your focus on that. So each one of these, you would break it up based on, how you have defined your audience and the budget that you have to reach out to each segment of your audience. And then, of course, we would have to create content that works for the target audience plus the channel that you have chosen. So this is a table that I find helpful for making it seamless. So we talked earlier about defining the brand attribute, both, why someone should buy you, as well as the unique differentiator of why they should buy from your organization and not from anyone else. So one is to list down the brand attributes, and the second is to put down the support points. Typically, we would like to see brand attributes that are superlatives. That is, everybody would like to be the first, the biggest, the only, the best. And it's important because customers value those kind of words. So the second thing is, then how do you support this? So if you are the biggest, the best, or whatever, how do you prove that you are? You might have to showcase your revenue or the number of customers, or if you say largest, you may have to show that you have offices in 200 countries or whatever. And sometimes these points would even be artificial. I mean, long before coffee was so big, it always had international operations in Prague, and therefore they could say that they were an international coffee company, even though primarily it is Indian. Or Cognizant has always said that they are a US firm, and that's because they're headquartered in the US. So your support points may be created to support a brand attribute that you have chosen as a differentiator, or it could already be there, and therefore you can easily put that in as your support point. But it's helpful to go search for the superlative and then find a support point. And the more support points you have for your superlative, the better it is, because each of them could be used to run a campaign. Once you have your support points, you would then develop your asset repository. So it could be photos, it could be certificates, it could be white papers, it could be awards, anything that backs up the support point and the brand attribute. And you also now have to think about the tool of where you're going to keep this asset repository, and who's the team in charge of it, and make this available to everyone. And this is the tricky part, because when we spoke to marketers, many of them are really frustrated, saying that we spend half our life just sending out assets again and again. So it's really useful to develop a single point of asset repository, not have it lying everywhere. Then we move to communication piece, and again, I have chosen to split it up into internal and external, because often from a marketing perspective, we focus on external communication. But if internal is handled at the same time, then you will have a mismatch between what the customer sees and what he experiences, because your internal audience really hasn't heard about these new assets that you have or the new position that you have. And typically your internal channels have to be thought through, and are usually you should ideally use a tool such as a Yammer or an intranet like SharePoint, anything where you can put it up and everybody has access to it. And then, of course, it's a behavioral change in terms of ensuring that everybody is actually accessing it. External now, and we will cover this in a little bit, there's a huge range of choices that you have in terms of which one. So it ranges right from newspapers to important, because often what happens is that there's a big campaign around the launch and then interest dies down and it doesn't happen again, whereas these are points that have to be iterated again and again and again. So it's important to put down the frequency, and also obviously you would review this on a yearly basis at the very least. In the case, I mean, I did talk a little bit online that talk about why a logo is important and how you can actually make it work. I feel that, recent logo launches, whether it's a Snapdeal or a Wipro, they focus too much on the logo and not so much on the brand attributes that the logo stands for. So if we had looked at the brand attribute that the logo is conveying and then spent time on developing the support points for it, then the story would be memorable. So when we talk about, making the e-com experience special or unbox Zindagi, it has to go a little bit beyond an ad campaign and say, okay, this is how I'm going to make it really special. I have the most number of warehouses, so I can deliver to parts of the country that nobody else can, or I can do it faster, or I have the the widest range of products. There has to have been a superlative associated with the brand promise, which could then be substantiated, with communication, and then you come to the actual communication part of it. If we take the case of Wipro again, they've chosen to say that they're connecting the dots and they have moved into the digital space. Both are really good positions, and it's nice to have them. But if I look at it, the support point, which is that they have acquired two recent acquisitions up to 2015. One was Design It, Perio. These are great support points because at a Danish design house, it's very respected, 300 people. If they had added that one support point to the outgoing communication on the logo, then it would have added more support. But if, let's say, the logo had designed by that design firm, then again, there would have been a whole different story to share with the audience. So, sometimes when you do the process, you will gain insights into the amazing assets that the organization have and why it is successful from a customer's perspective, not just internal perspective. And you'll be able to weave this into your storyboarding and use it across multiple channels. So if you take, for example, your interviews, anything. So there are new assets coming in to support what, is the company statement that, hey, I've gone digital. So when we do an audit, it helps to cover these things, and it helps also to bridge the gaps between what someone else says is the organization's trend and what internally the perception is of what makes that true. Again, just for those who came in now, if you have questions, post them in the chat window and we will answer those. So this is a quick snapshot of the tools, and again, there are many more, so you should do a separate one for internal, external, mainstream, digital. But these are the quick digital ones. What kind of content you would have and what would be the objective based on your target audience. So your tool, is listing, then there's a purpose to the tool, and then there is content. For every tool you're actually considering using, and you will have to keep changing and updating it, because sometimes something like Google Plus, not so important anymore except from an SEO perspective, where Snapchat or Instagram, which a couple of years ago were not terribly relevant, have now kind of become relevant if your audience is within a certain age group and also geography based. So you would have to consider that as well. And even tools like the dark social media, now Messenger, WhatsApp, they are coming into use for marketing and advertising. So what content would you put out there? And you would need to maintain a single repository, a library of all the content that would work. And ideally, you should have an automation tool which would also, flag expiries of the content and also enable you to push it out into the market at the right time. So people often ask, how do you measure marketing? What are the metrics? So I'm not going to go into these one by one, because I would like to wrap up in half an hour, but these were some of the metrics that have been handy in which element is working. So in my channels, I had a number of channels. So this is kind of how we measure whether each of those channels is working. It is from a certain context, so obviously you might want to change it around, but by and large, these work for most organizations with some tweaking required for specialist organizations. And there is a whole bunch of metrics, so these would again ideally have to be hardwired into your Okay, if I can request whoever's in traffic to mute themselves. Thank you. Okay, and so we continue with the metrics. And so I want to leave a little bit of time. We have 1 minute. If there are any questions, if you can put them into the chat window, or you can unmute and ask me the question. Otherwise, yeah, I've got a question: what metrics you use for new business acquisition that marketing is involved in? Yeah, okay, so this is a little tricky because often it is not purely marketing. There is a sales angle, which is why I assume the question has come. So typically what we say is that if someone is coming through a marketing control channel such as the website or social media, then 100% credit. If again, anything that you're doing, setting, any of those direct metrics are there. The other option is to say that how did marketing facilitate sales? So that's the second piece. But typically the metrics that I used is the number of 2 points. One is the number of actual leads that marketing has brought in through channels that it controls, such as the website, emails, etc. And the second is the number of touch points with existing customers, because your question isn't very clear, but it could be new business acquisition, or it could be customer mining. And often customer mining, the responsibility lies with marketing and the account manager. So number of touch points that you have facilitated with the customer, and usual metrics are that every 3 months you must touch the customer at least 3 times, whether it's new or existing customer. If you have done that, then again that should be given some weighted average in terms of influencing sales from that particular customer.
Huh? Sorry.
Okay, I have no idea where this is coming from, but if there are no other questions, then I'm going to wrap. And thank you so much for joining us. And you can look at the Connected CMO, our microsite as well, for previous sessions and the recordings. And thank you so much. And you have my email ID as well if you would like to ask me any questions. Thank you. Have a great weekend.